The power of the US dollar means that you can impose sanctions and you can take away $300 billion from Russia. Okay? And all you have to do is print money. You print money and you pay for these goods that have been produced with a lot of hard labor. President Trump is right in one thing. You do need to create jobs in the United States of America for the bottom 50%.
Kishore Mahbubani, a Singapore diplomat and geostrategist, is one of the most preeminent thinkers and strategists of our time. So thank you so much, Kishore, for joining us.
The tragedy here is that the United States is dismantling an order that has actually served American interests very, very well. And since World War II, you're the unquestioned number one power in the world. And all this was resting on an order, the 1945 rules-based order that was created by the United States and its Western allies. It has the US dollar as the global reserve currency. And that, as many economists have said, grants an exorbitant privilege to the United States. The most powerful weapon the United States has in the world is not its aircraft carriers, is not its F-35 jets. It's the US dollar. Because the power of the US dollar means that you can impose sanctions, right? And you can take away $300 billion from Russia. Okay? You can do that. And guess what? The Chinese have to work very hard, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to produce shoes, refrigerators, computer parts for you. And all you have to do is print money. You print money and you pay for these goods that have been produced with a lot of hard labor. So I think in many ways, the United States has also benefited from this world order significantly. And I think that's why it's a mistake for the United States to dismantle this order. What's interesting is that even though the United States is walking away from the rules-based order, the rest of the world is still embracing it. The last 30 years have been the best 30 years in 3,000 years of Chinese history. Now, if this rules-based order, which is a gift from the West to the world, has benefited China so much, why would China want to dismantle an order in which China is the number one beneficiary? The Chinese are not illogical. The Chinese are not irrational. When the Chinese export the parts for, let's say, an iPhone, they really get $40 to $50. But the phone is sold for $1,000 or $2,000. The balance of value stays in the United States of America. The United States economy is not suffering when you have a trade deficit. In fact, the United States economy is benefiting in some ways because you're getting cheap goods, well-manufactured goods from the rest of the world, including China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Mexico, and so on and so forth. If you look at the impact of that trade deficit, does it undermine American lives? And the answer is no, it doesn't undermine American lives. In many ways, the United States has not had the problem of inflation because it's been able to get well-manufactured goods at a very low cost from China and the rest of the world. So I think it's important to look at the overall big picture. That's where, frankly, I think President Trump gets his economics wrong. The challenge for the United States today, sadly, is that it has become a deeply divided society. President Trump is right in one thing. You do need to create jobs in the United States of America for the bottom 50%. The bottom 50% in America, the data shows this, haven't seen an improvement in their standard of living for 30, 40 years. But that is not because China is manufacturing goods. The United States has essentially become a plutocracy. A plutocracy is a society where public policy decisions are made not to benefit the majority at the bottom, but the top 1%, 2%. That's what America. And by the way, this whatever I'm saying is not original from me. American scholars have saying all this. I'm just repeating what American scholars are saying. In fact, the American middle class has diminished, significantly. So, therefore, if the United States wants to win the contest against China, It should rebuild the strength of its domestic society. That should be its priority. Because at the end of the day, you know, like in any athletic contest, right? You're better off trying to win by running faster rather than trying to kneecap your opponent. So if he wants to improve the lives of the bottom 50%, that's a legitimate thing for him to try to do. But he's not going to succeed by just forcing manufacturing out of China to come back to the United States, because manufacturing requires a whole ecosystem, which in many ways has disappeared from the United States. But you can also create good jobs in many, many other areas. And one thing that President Trump doesn't mention is that in the services sector, the United States has a huge trade surplus. So why focus on areas where others have relative strengths? Focus on the areas where you have relative strengths. And it's quite clear that the Chinese have been quite ingenious in creating a long-term manufacturing strategy for China. And that manufacturing capability of China is now indispensable to the rest of the world. I mean, all of you, if you open your kitchen cupboards or whatever it is, take out the products. See how many of the components in any of the products came from China. Just check. You'll be amazed. This is not by accident. China wants to create deep dependence on China's manufacturing sector. And you know, incidentally, even 5 years ago, if you had asked anybody, could China ever join the competition for cars? He would say, no way, the Germans are so far ahead, Japanese are so far ahead, Koreans are far ahead, even the Americans are far ahead. But you know what, today, the Chinese have started from scratch, created an electric vehicle EV industry that is now frightening the pants of all car makers all over the world. But did this EV challenge from China emerge by accident? No. It is part of the long-term strategy. And 5 years from now, all over the world, you see Chinese EV. Position that the United States has had for, by the way, 130, 140 years as the number one power in the world. That can change. The United States has made, in some ways, a rational calculation that if and when the Chinese economy becomes number one, everything changes. And, you know, the West makes up 12% of the world's population. The rest make up 88%. And the Asians make up 55% of the world's population. Power is shifting away from the West to the rest, especially to Asia. And the 21st century, by the way, will be the Asian century.
When Mahbubani calls the US dollar America's most powerful weapon, he's not exaggerating. Central banks around the world hold vast reserves of foreign currency to protect against economic shocks. Today, those global reserves exceed $12 trillion, and nearly 60% is still held in US dollars. That's far more than any other currency. The euro comes a distant second at around 20%, while China's renminbi accounts for just 2.5%. This system creates the remarkable scenario Mahbubani described. The United States can essentially print money to buy goods made by hardworking people abroad. When the Federal Reserve issues new dollars, Americans can spend them on Chinese-made products without triggering the inflation or currency collapse that would normally follow such money creation. Why? Because those dollars don't stay in America. They flow outward into global reserves, where they become another country's store of value instead of fueling inflation at home. It's a privilege no other nation has. When it comes to global power, nothing rivals the US dollar. When Kishore Mahbubani says the United States has become a plutocracy, a system that serves the top 1% while abandoning the lower half, he's not alone. Some of the most respected names in economics have been sounding the same alarm. Paul Volcker, legendary former Fed chair, warned in his final memoir titled Keeping at It that the central issue is we're developing into a plutocracy. We've got enormous numbers of enormously rich people who've convinced themselves they're rich because they're smart and constructive. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist, put it bluntly, America has become the best democracy money can buy. In his book, The Price of Inequality, he shows how U.S. policy has been reshaped for the top 1%, while leaving the bottom half behind. Back in 2011, he wrote in Vanity Fair, "Of the 1% by the 1% for the 1%. Across the Atlantic, Martin Wolf, chief economics commentator at the Financial Times, called it out too. In 2018, he wrote, "The U.S. is a plutocracy pretending to be a democracy." His book, The Crisis of Democratic Capitalism, argues that extreme wealth is now eroding both markets and democracy itself. So when Mahbubani says the system is broken, it's not a fringe opinion. It's a diagnosis shared by the minds at the very center of global economic thought, many of whom are American.